Now I'd like to welcome Steve Cullen up here. Steve is going to introduce our 2018 Irvine Media Award recipient, Mark Larson, along with Cliff Albert. They're going to go in succession. Steve's going to start. Steve is news director at KUSI, and he also started and founded Court TV. So, Steve.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, I've got to take a deep breath. Mark Larson is so funny. Do you think he's funny? Anybody? He has a sense of humor. Anyway, take a deep breath. Thank you for allowing me to be here. And I'm sort of the warm-up. Cliff is the actual guy that will talk about Mark. I'm here really more to talk about my friend, Herb Klein, and also to talk about the status of news. Here's what I do for a living. I'm the news director at KUSI. We start at 5 a.m. in the morning, and by 11:30 at night, we've created 8.5 hours of television news from scratch. You know, there's literally nothing there. There's no legal briefs. There's nothing happening. We literally have to make it up. I can't call on anybody and say, what the heck should we be doing today? So anything that's the matter with that 8.5 hours falls on me. But Mark and I are in the same orbit of KUSI. Of course, he's one of our main political commentators. And we're fortunate in that we work for a company called McKinnon Broadcasting, which is run by Mike McKinnon Sr. and Mike McKinnon Jr. and also Mark. And why we're fortunate is simple. It's a little bit of an advertisement here, but I want to say it to this group. This is an important group. When you go up to Mike McKinnon Sr., if you're a young kid out of school walking around my newsroom, inevitably he'll come up to the young kid and he'll say to the kid, hey, what do you think we do here? And these kids, out of Aztec kids will usually say, you're here to make a profit. And Mr. McKinnon will look at them and say, no, that's not why we're here. We're here to serve this community. And if we serve this community, we'll make a profit. And that's who I work for. And I'm damn proud of it, I'll tell you what. And this community has profited from that. I've been here over a decade and a half. I've had in a lot of different posts, but this is the best post of all. And like you folks, at our front desk we have a boxes underneath, but on the front we have our own little KUSI TV Constitution. It's not the KUSI Constitution; it's the U.S. Constitution. But the Mike McKinnon Constitution is work your ass off and do a good job. That's pretty much it. That's the First Amendment. But we give these away seriously to everybody who comes in. Any guest that comes on our air, we give them a Constitution because we want people to read it. When I was a young man, I was in Peoria, Illinois. I was a news director, and it was 1972, so I've been at this a while. And I was in Peoria. Herb Klein, whose name is on this award for Mark, was in the White House, and he invented the Office of White House Communications. There was no White House Communications office until Herb Klein showed up and created it. So he's in Washington. I'm a young kid in my 20s in Peoria, and I learned something really fast about news, television news. I was an anchorman and news director. During those years, you may remember that there was a guy named Bob Haldeman who worked in the Nixon White House who adopted the phrase, you know what it is? Will it play in Peoria? Right? So through that whole administration, they always said, will it play in Peoria? And then I was working at an ABC station. There was a guy in New York named Av Weston who was the president of ABC News. And because I was in Peoria, he would call me and say, Steve, I'm like, this is true. Av would call me and say, Steve Cohen, whoever the hell you are, kid, how's this playing in Peoria? And then he asked me about the economy. And then he would ask me about the Vietnam War. How's it playing in Peoria? How's the Nixon policies doing in Peoria? And I would say to him what was true, because I was covering the news. I'd say, you know what, Av, it's playing pretty well down here in Peoria. I mean, the Nixon administration is a winner. And so all the stories I would send to Av, guess what? Never got on TV. Now, why was that? It was a quick way for me at 20-something to learn that the American media system, if not rigged, had an inherent bias within it, which is that there was a narrative, even in the 1970s, that was a narrative that was not bent on serving the Constitution or American conservatism and the values of libertarians. Now, if you're a 20-year-old kid and you find that out there and you believe what I believe, which I think is what you guys believe about the Constitution and the way America should work, it's a long, long slog to where I am today up against that. But you can hold on to your values and get it done, and that's what I learned from Herb Klein. So I got to know Herb in the last decade of his life. So he lived till 90. He would come by the station once a week and he would be on television and he would talk about American politics. I had a nice friendship with him. He was really good to me. We'd sit in his office or in his apartment. We'd talk about what I just said. I told him that Peoria story. And he said, Steve, you know what? I could have told you that if I had known you in those years. And it's worse than ever today. And he said, why did I create a communications department? Because it's a battle between the truth that comes from our point of view and the way American media looks at the same facts from their point of view. And if you're not prepared to battle, you can't win. That was Herb Klein. And from 80 till 90, even in his 90s, and you know this, Mark, he would literally, he was in a wheelchair then with an oxygen tank. We would wheel, I know this sounds crazy, but we would wheel him in to the newsroom. He'd come by my office, and he always had something to say about current politics. He'd take out his breathing device, and he'd go on the air, and he'd talk to our anchor people. He did that into his 90s because we did his 90th birthday party with the wonderful Jack Kemp and Pete Wilson as well. And he often said to me, Steve, you know, it's a battle, but you can learn every day from people that you don't think are going to have anything to offer. So don't close your mind. Keep it open. I don't care who that guy is. Don't prejudge him, whether it's Governor Brown or even Bob Filner. God rest his soul, wherever the hell he is. But you can learn. You know, you can learn from people. Because we're a group of lawyers, I'm going to diverge just for half a second, and I'll get back to Mark. Okay. But I was one of the guys that created Court TV, and we put cameras in courtrooms. That's what we did in Court TV. And I was the guy that had to convince the judges that we wanted to put cameras in their courts. So we did, Jeffrey Dahmer, William Kennedy Smith's rape trial, OJ, of course, and all those big trials. But I was there in Washington when Clarence Thomas was going through the nomination procedure, right? And the first impaneling of Clarence Thomas was about natural law, right? It wasn't about Anita Hill, it was about natural law. It was a fantastic week of testimony, and Thomas was extraordinary. Now, I'm in charge of this coverage, and I'm in DC like 4 feet away from the hearing, and I was so lucky because I had Judge Bork was my main commentator. And so I'm sitting there with Judge Bork, who taught me I could talk about what Herb said. Listen to Bork. What he taught me in a week about natural law and everything else was just extraordinary. He had a quirk, the justice though, and it was this: he loved Famous Amos cookies. So every morning before I would sit with him, before we go on TV, we had to buy a different canister of Famous Amos. He wouldn't ever eat the same Famous Amos 2 days in a row. This is a crazy guy, but a great jurist. And then Anita Hill came, and to see this gentleman, this great man of the law, and how he had to deal with that week of Anita Hill, which, as we know, was pretty much a political witch trial that was brought about by the Democrats to keep Clarence Thomas from being Supreme Court justice. Boy, think of the analogies of what I just said and what's happening today to the efforts to delegitimize the President of the United States. I mean, you know, you can draw a direct line between what they tried to do to Justice Thomas and what was happening to Donald Trump. So you learn stuff doing what I do for a living, and I'll tell you what I learned from Bork. And from Herb. Herb always said, the things that are important, Cohen, are credibility, you gotta be truthful, find out what the truth is, whatever the hell it is, and don't give up on the truth. You've gotta have a sense of proportionality. What are you gonna fight for? You're gonna fight for everything with the same energy? Or are you gonna realize that there are some things that are gonna happen that have to do with the protection of truth in the Constitution that really matter a lot, and you're gonna put your energy behind that? And then, of course, Herb being Herb, said to me, and there's one damn thing that you don't have a lot of it, you gotta develop, and it's called a sense of humor. So I've developed it a little bit, but not nearly enough. But Mr. Larson has all of those qualities. He's a humanist. He is a man who understands the truth and only speaks the truth. And he's a man who really does understand, through his sense of humor, what matters and what doesn't. Couldn't be prouder today to be one of the guys that's introducing you to him, and that he should be getting the Herb Klein Award. And now I want to introduce Cliff Albert.
Good evening. Good answer. Mark and I have worked together since 1974. That was a long time ago. First at WROK Radio in Rockford, Illinois, where Mark was born, back in the 1970s. If you're old enough to remember the 1970s, maybe not. Even if you were there in the 1970s, you may not remember the 1970s. Then it was on to KFMB in San Diego in 1976, when he and his lovely wife, Marcia, just married just months before, moved to San Diego, and he became the nighttime air personality at the old KFMB building here in downtown San Diego. But through the 70s and late 70s and 80s and early 90s, Mark led the station to great success, became a part of the transformation. He was the key in the transformation of the station to News Talk back in the early 90s, and was consistently #1. Then Mark and I worked together at News Radio 600 Dakota, where I now am news director. In the mid-2000s, whatever the mid-2000s might be to you, but what else can you say? Where we put up a billboard, in fact, when Mark was doing his talk show at Kogo, that urged our listeners to tune into his talk show, that consistently, and still does actually at KFMB now again, the big newsmaker guests, the key people who are speaking from the conservative viewpoint, newsmakers, members of the administration, members of past administrations, and Mark still talks to them almost every day on his show. But Mark began his interest in current events and news many years ago. Because I want to tell you a few things about Mark Larson that you probably don't know, even if you know him all that well. You see, Mark began his interest in current events and news as a very young child. And there's proof of that, actually. We do have evidence of that. A photo exists of him as a 2-year-old boy reading a newspaper, sitting on the toilet.
That's true.
That's right. Later in life, as an on-air radio personality in Rockford, Illinois, at WROK, he became a subscriber to one of the fine journalistic publications in the world, Weekly World News, the supermarket tabloid, where he got a lot of his material for his show. Space aliens, women who have been pregnant 73 times in 4 weeks. I don't know if you ever read that on the toilet, though. He may not have, I'm not sure. In junior high, Mark played the oboe. You know the oboe, it's one of those wind instruments that you have to kind of turn your mouth into some sort of weird contortion thing. He didn't do it very long, though, because he says it killed his lips. And if you've seen his lips, of course, he just has a sweet-looking guy. Back in the 70s and early 80s, he had long hair. Because, I mean, think of Tchotchke in Happy Days. That's kind of the kind of hair he had and all that. He still had lots of hair. And his hair is real. A lot of people will ask me about that. Mark is also a voracious reader. I mean, he reads so many books that he probably now owns about 10% of Barnes & Noble. I mean, his home is filled with books. And it drives Marcia crazy because, you know, they have to pay special insurance to the state of California for the weight of that house. You also, he is the person that you would want. If you're in a trivia contest, Mark Larson is the guy that you would want to play and be on your team. We've gone on cruises with Mark and Marcia, Marianne and I. We always make sure that Mark is on our trivia team. He's like Mr. Jeopardy. You know, the rest of us at our age, yeah, what's the name of that guy? You know, it's like my wife and I were watching a movie the other day. We said, that's the guy who was, he was with her, and that woman, and then that show, and we both said, yeah, we got it. And we never once were able to say the name, but he just instantly remembers. In fact, you can give him, I challenge you tonight after the program, you can give him the title of any adult contemporary song from the 70s and 80s, maybe into the early 90s, and he will be able to tell you in a matter of moments the name of the artist and even some of the words of the song if he couldn't sing the whole thing, right? That's right. And looking back to those days, on our first double date, not Mark and I, Mark and his wife and Marianne and my wife and I, he put straws in his nose. You might say, why would he do that? And I thought it was kind of strange at the time, but I learned that in radio, it's just what we call in the business being memorable. Yes. And Mark Larson is memorable because he is so unique, so wise, and so to the point when he makes his commentary on the radio or television. And that same date, as I recall, by the way, he showed no fear either. When I was, as I was driving with him and his wife in the back seat, I had to tell the story. I lowered my seat back into their laps and kept driving. And he did let me drive again with them. And I also have to tell you, Sharon, my wife wanted to make sure I shared this story because Mark has been a mentor to our kids. And we have, you know, known them as family in effect for a long time. But Mark was the one who taught our daughter, our oldest child, how to speak on a telephone, except the telephone was a banana. And he taught her how to speak on a banana. And we have a photo of that too, if anybody wants to blackmail him later. Yes, yeah. Mark was in the stands at what is still is described as the best NFL football game in the history of the NFL, the epic in Miami, as they called it, back in 1982, January 2nd, 1982. Mark was at the Miami Orange Bowl as the Chargers played the Miami Dolphins. And of course, it was a great game. And after the game, I know we stayed out very, very late. I don't remember much else. He probably does, but I don't. Mark also, you should know, if you haven't heard him do it on the air, he does very accurate bipartisan impressions of former presidents, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. He hasn't figured out Donald Trump quite yet, I don't think. If you get a chance tonight, by the way, I invite you to walk up to Mark and say, hello, Mr. President, and see which of them he does. Mark also was in the early stages, all right, the very early stages, of writing a book about the famous people that he has known through the years and interviewed, including Mikhail Gorbachev, and the dangerous places he's been, some of which are classified, so I can't tell you, but one of them starts with an A and ends with Afghanistan. Mark also is a great dad. Not only is a great broadcaster and believer in what we do on radio and television and what this organization does and the ideals it stands for. He took each of his children when they were growing up to Washington, D.C. When they were there, not only to give them the knowledge about their country and its ideals, but as their father, Mark wanted to instill in them the American spirit of our founding fathers. Mark has many loves. He loves God, he loves his family, he loves his country very much, and he loves his friends. I'm thankful and fortunate to call Mark not only one of my closest friends for more than 40 years now, but he's a brother. A brother personally, not in the genetic sense, but in the relationship sense, and in the professional sense. And this award recognizes those who believe in and exercise the freedom of the press to speak the truth and to stand for the ideals of our country, Mark truly deserves the Herb Klein Award. So now here he is. Mark.
Thank you and good night. I'm overwhelmed. I keep, when John, well, actually it was Bob Gaglione, who we're up here at the University Club like months ago, sitting there. I'm just kind of having lunch. He's doing his thing. He has an entourage and all that. He's like, hey, I think you got to save the date because I think we're going to do the Herb Klein Awards. You mean the one that Cliff won last year, where I introduced him? You're going to do what? So we're going to give it to you, I think. I said, are you waiting for like some of the dimpled Chads to come in from Florida? There's got to be a recount. It's got to be like Al Franken and Norm Coleman, where they in Minnesota they went, we found 200 more votes. I'm sorry, you're out. It's under the car seat. It blows me away because I knew Herb Klein for about the same period of time that Steve knew. Just to have Steve and Cliff here tonight, and Dave Sniff, who's my current boss. Here's the inside deal. I may have mentioned this last year for those of you who were here when I introduced Cliff. I know it sounds a little incestuous right now, but we're all my friends. I'm still blown away because Herb Klein was a giant, and I watched the biggest, most powerful people in California sit at his feet for a blessing from Herb. I mean, he was unbelievable. He was fantastic, and just to know him and have our lives intersect was worth it in life. There's certain people, certain experiences we go. This is one of those moments. So to be here with Steve Cohen, I've worked with Steve pretty much from day one, 11 years ago, as a contributor at KUSI. We have some of our best times at KUSI are the after party after I've done my segment and I've pontificated like Herb would do, and we sit in his office for a half hour and talk about all kinds of things. We talk about this country, talk about the Constitution. I came here with my long-suffering wife, Marcia, the long-suffering Mrs. Larson. Our 3 kids are here tonight. One of the spouses are here, the others are busy with kids or work, and so Krista and Jeff and Brandon are here, and Tiffany, daughter-in-law. They know, they deal with me, they endure me. They know that I love this country and I love the Constitution and I'm a stickler for it, but I also know that life is short and we better keep a sense of humor, and if we don't, we miss it. Herb knew that. Even when Herb was on the oxygen tank, he had that sense of humor. Steve has a great sense of humor. Cliff has a great sense of humor. Dave Sniff, who's my current boss at AM 760, going back to it for my second tour of duty after being there for like 18 years. First job, we came to San Diego and thought, we'll be here 3 years. You know how radio is. Now almost 42 years later, I love this community. I love coming to the University Club because we look out here and go, as challenging as this is, as different as the state of California is. By the way, Judge, we bag on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals all the time. I'm so encouraged to be, so do you, I know. We call it the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, right? I love the fact that there are this many right-thinking attorneys and many others who couldn't be here tonight. This floats my boat in California. This makes me think all is not lost, and I appreciate the work that you do because I know how it works. You get the right panel under you. Once in a while, I'll be on the air and go, well, the Ninth Circuit did something lucid. You must have been on the job, So we've seen the good, the bad, the ugly in California, but we're not moving. We're not moving to Texas. We have kids here. They've grown up here. I think that after 42 years, I'm a San Diego native, and that's what it's about. We also have an inside deal that every 25 years we hire each other. So I came out here in '76, hired Cliff Albert, brought him to KFMB. He totally transformed the KFMB radio side of news and never looked back, and he does the same thing over at Kogo now. Came out in '79. Dave Sniff, who's my boss now, was my assistant program director when I was program director. We hired him in 1977 when I was 9. I'm using Bob's math. Dave hires me back after we danced on this for 23 years, and I go back in June. When we all hire each other in 25 years, let's come back here. That's going to be a heck of an evening. We're going to have no idea what we're talking about. It's going to be fantastic. But I love the fact that every day we can live out our lives on the radio. Mac Hudson of Hudson & Bauer, still an unduplicated team, worked with us, part of our team in those glory days at KFMB when we're number one all the time. And Dave's doing a great job. with the legacy of what we've done. And he's like a lifer there now, the little whippersnapper we hired. It was never about just doing radio. It was never about coming to a market. One of the things that drives me nuts is when people say, I came to this market. That tells me they're not for San Diego long. If you don't see it as a community, if you don't see it as a town, if you don't see it as a neighborhood, if you don't see it in a way that makes a difference. We moved here, when Marcia and I moved here in 1976, we were working at Top 40 Radio, and we were at a station in Rockford, Illinois that didn't compete with Rockford, it competed with Chicago. It was a big dog. It was a Grand International Station of the Year, WROK. Cliff was running the newsroom. We played Top 40 Radio. We had Paul Harvey. We did all this stuff. We served the community and never lost that. We could go out of there. We were huge and never forgot the fact that you had to be the ambassador that you were at work when you're in the community. You all know that. You can't be in a courtroom. You can be one thing. Yeah, you do your job, whatever. But if you're authentic, you're in this little teeny tiny part of America now that resonates. That we can be in a business where we do news and it's always different. Yeah, I use humor and my talk show is done in a different way, but it's always about the essential issues. Okay, Herb Klein knew that. The real communicators know that it's not about trying to be someone else, it's about being authentic. So if you're you and you're driven by the love for this country and freedom and liberty and the Constitution as the framers meant it, and when you know people, when you've been around here for a long time, you start to realize who the movers and shakers are. It's great to see the city attorney here tonight. It's great to see the people from the Lincoln Club here tonight. It's great to, some of you I've known for countless years, and we'll all pretend that we're 22. But I love that about this community. So we're not going to pack up and move to Texas. The fact that KUSI allows me to go on and talk in context. I was on last night, we're down in Costera, we're talking about what's coming up in 2018. I had like 4.5 minutes to talk in context. You realize how unusual that is? And the same thing with KFNB Radio, where we can go on and we can just be ourselves. Nobody ever comes in and says, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this. It's about being authentic. Just being able to do that without someone saying, don't forget to work in the Kardashians into this. I'm chairman of the San Diego Air and Space Museum. I love that job. We had a service, for a memorial service on Midway today for Ev Southwick, who was Martin Garrick, who had to leave, was there with us, many of us. He was on our board. It took 1.5 years before he told me that he was a prisoner of war. Never made a big deal about it. He welcomed John McCain to the Hanoi Hilton. You start to meet people like that, who understand liberty and freedom, you never take it for granted. You don't sit there and go, well, this is fun, I'm doing a job in this market, and then I'll go to another market. No, you're blessed to be here. Look at this, look out the windows. We are blessed to be here. I'm blessed by God to be able to do what I do, and Lord willing, I'll die in the saddle in 37.5 years. And it's going to be spectacular because it'll be during sweeps. It's going to be fantastic. KUSI is going to cover it. We're going to hire each other in 25 years. It's going to be unbelievable. But Steve gives me the ability to do what I do. KUSI on the TV side reminds me of the original KFNB when I first joined, when Dave joined us, and when Cliff joined us. Sometimes people say, well, you change jobs a lot. It's like 42 years, 5 changes, twice to the same company. Okay, that's not bad if you do that math. Herb Klein got it. When we came out here, we had a chance to go at the time. So I told Marcia, I said, we're going to go to either Toronto or Baltimore. Those were 2 similar top 40 radio station jobs. And I remember saying, in the future, Lord willing, we're around for a long time, I don't want to be the oldest living disc jockey in America. It might be good because it beats the alternative. However, KFNB, we're talking with them, and I thought, that's like WGN. I grew up with WGN in Chicago, one of the great legendary stations. And Wally Phillips, Bob Collins, all those legendary people back there were friends. Almost went back to work there a couple times, but stayed here. The difference was, we came to KFNB and it was all about the community. It was living your lives out on the radio. It's doing what Herb Klein did. Herb had a point of view. And as Steve said, he invented the communications office of the White House. That's no insignificant thing. He dealt with like 5 presidents. And he worked for the Copley newspapers back when they had circulation, back when Bill Colliner was out working there for a while. And I would say, Billy, I know you're important, you were the sheriff and the police chief, but how's the paper route going? You know, those days. So Herb was unbelievable and consistent. And the community things, just Google him tonight. Google Herb Klein. You can never keep up with it. The Super Bowls, the Holiday Bowl, the things that he did in community service. And from day one, we rolled into town. I didn't expect to do nights. I was mentioned I did nights at KFMB. I was hired to the afternoons. We came out from Illinois in the covered wagons. And they said, well, change your plans. You need to do, you're going to do 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. I went, we made the biggest mistake in our life. And yet then we said, we're in San Diego. People vacation here. This is the coolest place. Went to the San Diego Air and Space Museum, not knowing years later I would be the chairman, now my 6th term. You assimilate with the community because it's a community, not a market. So you do what Herb did, which was you get plugged into the community. You read his bio, he was plugged in at every level. And even his biggest detractors, politically, respected him for the fact that he was wired in his community. And this award tonight blows me away. Because I'm not worthy of being in it, whether it's Cliff last year as the award or Herb. It's God's way of keeping us in check. Never believe your press clippings, but I am honored to receive this award tonight. And I'm encouraged by all of you men and women who are the good people when it comes to law and order in this country and standing up for the Constitution. Thank you. God bless America.
Thanks, Mark. Next, I'd like to welcome Judge Gonzalez up here, Irma Gonzalez, retired judge for the District Court for the Southern District of California.
Thank you. Whoa, I'm a little shorter. Okay, we'll leave it there. I am honored to be able to present the Justice Scalia Award. And I thank you, John, for inviting me to do this. As a federal judicial officer for a total of 28 years, it's really an honor to be able to present this award to Judge Bea. The first Justice Scalia Award was given to Judge Clifford Wallace of the Ninth Circuit in 2016. And this award was created in Justice Scalia's name after